Everybody, welcome to the Los Gatos Town Council meeting of September 3rd, 2019. Can we get a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Syak.
Here.
Councilmember Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Vice Mayor Jensen.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Leonardis.
Here. Leading us in our Pledge of Allegiance this evening is Cameron Amami. I would like to invite him up. And when he gets here, we will share a few words with you about Cameron. Cameron is a 9th grader at Los Gatos High School. He has been there, what is this, your second week? And your third week, all right. You already had a long weekend. His favorite activities in life are biking, tennis, kayaking, fishing, soccer, and most outdoor activities. And you can see he has a busted wrist from one of those, I'm sure. So we will not be shaking his right hand this evening. His favorite subjects are science and English. Some of his community service projects that Cameron is known for are he is a member of the Los Gatos Youth Commission. He is also, as part of that body, the liaison for the town's Parks Commission. He participates at the JCC in something called Jacob's Buddies, and it's an adaptive sports program league where he assists disabled kids with sports activities. And a notable achievement is when Jacob was the vice president of the Fisher student body, he organized fundraising activities for veterans and victims of a California fire. So let's give Jacob a big round of applause for his achievements. He will be leading us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Good job. So go and greet the other council members and then come back right here. Jacob. Let's give another round of applause for Jacob. Thank you. Next on our agenda is our consent calendar. Does any member of council wish to pull an item from consent? I see none. Does any member of the public wish to pull an item from consent? I see none. Vice Mayor?
Move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 5 on tonight's
Second.
agenda.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Next up is verbal communications. Is there anyone in our audience this evening who wishes to speak on any item which is not on our council agenda? I see no cards coming forward. We will move on to our first public hearing, which is item number 6, the introduction of ordinance to the town of Los Gatos, amending Chapter 2, Article 2, Section 2.20.035 of election of the mayor and the vice mayor. Mr. Schultz.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This was on your last agenda, and because of the changes that you ultimately requested at the direction of staff to bring back to you, we're back for first reading. As you know, each year at the second meeting in November, the Town Council elects a mayor and vice mayor pursuant to our town code. However, Government Code Section 3681 states that during election years, you must select your mayor and vice mayor after the results and installation of new officials. So therefore, on your August 20th meeting, you decided that your selection of mayor and vice mayor will annually now be selected at a special meeting in December of each year after receipt of election results from the Register of Voters. The special meeting shall occur prior to the second regular meeting in December to enable newly elected mayor to the opportunity to recommend appointments of council members to various boards and committees at the second regular meeting in December. So with that, the recommendation is that you accept public comment and then move for introduction and first reading of the ordinance by title only, amending Chapter 2, Article 3, Section 2.20.035, election of mayor and vice mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Questions for staff? Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Schultz, one item of discussion was when this was to take effect, and I looked at the ordinance that was submitted to us, and I noticed that it did indicate January 1, 2020, so that's part of.
Correct. So then, yes, it'll go in effect then, but it won't be actually take place
Okay.
until the following election at the end of 2020.
Okay, thank you.
So we have any other questions? None at this time. No cards on the subject. If anyone in the public wants to speak, this is your chance. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. We'll go to council. Vice Mayor.
I'll move in.
Hang on.
Oh,
Vice
sorry.
Mayor, did you wish to speak on the subject? Okay. Turn in a card for number 8. This is just for item number 7.
Okay.
6, I'm sorry.
6.
Vice Mayor.
Okay, I'm on 6. I'll move the introduction, the first reading of an ordinance that's contained in our staff item with the red line portions, and ask for a first reading of the ordinance by title only.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Ms. Neese, can you read the ordinance and title?
An ordinance of the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos amending Chapter 2, Article 2, Section 2.20.035, election of mayor and vice mayor.
Thank you. Moving on to our next item, number 7. Adopt an ordinance between the Board of Administration, California Public Employees Retirement System, otherwise known as CalPERS, in the Town of Los Gatos to add Government Code Section 20516 for an employee's sharing additional costs for classic local police members in the Los Gatos Police Officers Association. Ms. Valesco.
Good evening, Lisa Velasco, Human Resources Director. Before you tonight is a recommendation to adopt an ordinance between CalPERS and the town to finalize an amendment to the CalPERS contract, allowing the Police Officers Association to share additional cost of the employer's pension contribution rate. Because of CalPERS requirements regarding contract amendment procedures, the adoption and second reading may not be placed on consent. So that's the purpose for this staff report tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for staff at this time? I see none. We will go on to the public hearing. Does any member of the public wish to speak on this subject this evening? I see none coming forward, so we will close the public hearing. We'll move back to council for a motion and or discussion. Vice Mayor.
I will move that we adopt an ordinance that's contained in attachment 1 of our staff report, consistent with the discussion that we had at our last meeting on this subject.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Seeing none. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None. Passes unanimously. And moving on to item number 8, which is receive the private sector arts contribution program report and direct the preparation of an ordinance designating 1% of building valuation costs of new development for funding public arts. Mr. Ryan Baker.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Ryan Baker, Library Director and Staff Liaison for the Arts Commission. A private or public sector arts contribution program can be designated as a requirement on development projects to encourage funding of public arts through in lieu contributions or on-site construction, typically referred to as a Percent for Arts program. It is a common and increasingly popular requirement in California cities. In June of 2018, the Arts Commission came before Council, and at that time they recommended that Council adopt such an ordinance, and they had they recommended that at 0.5% for all development. Council directed staff at that meeting to look further into to what that would entail, including any legal concerns, any nexus study, what a financial analysis would look like for that. They also gave Council also gave direction at that time to exclude affordable housing, single-family residential, accessory dwelling units from such an ordinance. Staff retained consultant, Kaiser Marston Associates, and we have our consultant, Debbie Kern, here from Kaiser Marston today, and she can answer any questions should you have any. She produced the report, and the key findings of that report are that an arts requirement on development, as supported by legal precedent, is not an impact fee and does not require nexus analysis support. That was a major finding. The second was that the consultant recommended a 1% requirement with no threshold or cap. And staff notes for the record that the consultant's report did not actually analyze the Arts and Culture Commission's original suggestion of 0.5%. The third finding was that arts requirement in Los Gatos would generate very little revenue on an annual basis due to the built-out nature of town, but that it would allow the town to benefit from a significant project to catch things should any point in the future we have a large project. The requirement would apply to both in lieu payments for arts or on-site construction, but it is noted that it is very likely that the threshold for being viable to do on-site art would not be reached very often. And the last recommendation that was fairly large was that the report recommends enacting an arts contribution requirement for public projects as well, which would exclude street overlays and infrastructure. The Arts and Culture Commission took a look at the consultant's report, and they suggested that the council look at, instead of a 1% fee, to consider a 1.5% fee for arts on development for arts. And they also wish to express that that this would probably, if adopted, would be only one facet of what would be a multi-pronged approach to arts funding in town, and that they would look into and be researching other possibilities for arts funding, which would be presented at a future date. Staff recommends to move forward, despite the low numbers in the analysis, to move forward with an ordinance, thinking that we will be able to catch any future catch revenues from that from any future problems that occur, as it's not possible to foresee the future and what things will happen in terms of building development projects. There are two little clarifications that we wanted to add if you decided to accept the consultant's report. One is that the consultant's report mentions multifamily residential as 2 or more units. Staff would like to clarify that we would define it as 3 or more units. And we just would like to, again, restate the exemptions for single-family residential, 2-unit projects, accessory dwelling units, and affordable housing projects, as was previously stated by council. Whether or not council wishes to consider the Arts and Cultures Commission to suggest a higher percentage fee is at the discretion of council. That closes the report that I have, and we'll open for questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. Baker. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, Mr. Baker, thank you. Thank your consultant. Well done. If we assume, as your report says, that there will be relatively small amounts of money at play unless some large project comes up, and so we're looking at $3,000 to $7,000. And I know you said that the Arts Commission would be looking at other things to do with the monies. But that would be in the future. We might get some low thousands in an account. What would you anticipate happening with that money at this point if this ordinance is adopted?
Based on discussions with the Arts and Culture Commission and listening to their meetings, it sounds like they would be more privy at this point to holding that money until a substantial amount to actually take on a project would have accumulated. So they don't foresee with just this alone that any project would come about in the very near future, but they see that over the course of the amount accumulating for several years that they would have enough for a project. Then combine that with other things that they would come up with for funding options, they're hoping that would be more substantial.
And what do you see as, or what does the Arts Commission see as the point at which the monies, the accumulated monies, are sufficient to do something with the funding?
So as an example, the Gateway project, which is currently underway, has about a $20,000 price tag, $25,000 price tag to it. So for something of that size and nature, that's kind of the price tag we're looking at. Some of the things that we're doing around town, such as the wraps on the utility boxes, have a much lower price tag, a couple $1,000s. I'm sure Mr. Morley could speak more on the actual cost of those particular programs. Murals, $10,000, $12,000 range, somewhere in there. The commission has researched some different projects, but has not, because of not having funding, they have not actually set on something. But a $20,000 range would probably be appropriate for a small project.
Good answer, thank you.
Councilmember Sayak?
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe some of the building fees that we impose have time limits to them. And so I'm curious if a fee such as this would also have a time limit that these funds have to be used.
Since it's not an impact fee, it's not associated to that same 5-year to at least budget where they're going to go, not actually expend them, but budget where them is a 5-year period. But these aren't considered impact fees, and we don't have to do an impact fee study or an AB 1600 Nexus study, so no, there wouldn't be any time frame.
Okay. And if I may, a second question, because they're not impact fees and there's no nexus connection, they also do not have to be placed in or around the development itself and can be used throughout the town?
Yes, and I'll hand over to the consultant here to clarify a little bit more. But there are 2 components. If it reaches a certain threshold where it makes sense for the developer to place on-site artwork, then they would go ahead and do so on-site. However, most of the projects that we would have would be an in lieu fee. They would pay an in lieu. That in lieu could be used for public art anywhere in the town, or it could be defined and used as for performance art or other types of arts. So it doesn't not have to necessarily have to be an installation type situation. And I don't know if our consultant has any further comment on that.
That's correct. It does not need to be in any proximity to the project. It can be citywide.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may just add that really the question before you tonight is, should we go forward and draft an ordinance for your later consideration? Do you want an arts fee program? If yes, then we'll come back with the ordinance, and then we'll also start working on the program elements itself. So how would we use it? What kind of projects would qualify? How would we determine them? So there's still a fair amount of work ahead should you decide to proceed.
Vice Mayor?
I have several, if I might. Mr. Baker, thank you for your report, and thank you, consultant. It was a very good report. As I understand the recommendation, it's basically if you do this, you're not going to get a whole lot of money. So essentially, this is a backstop in case something big comes along where you're going to get any money. Is that a kind of a basic foundational correct assumption?
Yes, I would think it would be backstop for some larger projects. So larger projects come up, and then the smaller amounts would accumulate in conjunction with other funding sources that the FCC has yet to identify.
If the council decided to actually, you just brought up the second part of my foundational question. I understood you to say that even if the council would have determined that if it wanted to go ahead with something like this, the Arts Commission would be coming back looking for additional funding from the town, correct?
I should clarify that it's not necessarily looking for funding from the town, as it would be looking for other ways that funding could be acquired from other sources or other funding models that we see in other parts of other jurisdictions.
Essentially, this program would not be enough, in their view, to fund their projects.
That is
as
correct.
is.
That is correct.
Okay. So if the council decided to go forward with an ordinance, knowing that, according to the report, it could generate only $7,400 a year, or with reduced rates, $3,500 a year. The report said that could be less than administrative costs. So in looking at the rest of the report, the administrative costs, I understand it would be developing an ordinance, developing a public arts program to support this, developing a process structure for approving art, managing whatever fund, taking in the money. So what I'm trying to figure out is, so on a theoretical level, it sounds good to have something in place just in case, but how much money would the town be spending for the privilege of having something just in case?
So the majority of that would be in staff costs, and at the outset, and I don't have a dollar amount, but at the outset, we do think that it would take more in staff costs than it would be pulling in. It would take us a few years in before we feel that we would actually even out, and those staff costs would be much less after the initial work had been done.
Okay, and then I'll have some more questions later, but my overall question now finally for this is, given that there's more staff costs and administrative costs than it would bring in, and that the town, as we learned for 2 hours earlier tonight, has a lot of other expenses and lots of other fees. For example, could we put money into an open space trust? Could we put money into a parks trust? Could we put money into So what kinds of things would we be losing if we were to invest money into this for administrative costs, knowing that the return is small?
Between the Arts and Culture Commission and then myself as staff liaison for the Arts and Culture Commission and the time that I have blocked out for working with that commission, I feel that it is perfectly within my workload to take those on at this particular time.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rennie?
Thank you. I'd like to explore this idea that not much money is going to be generated. The first question is, does this take effect when you apply for building permit or when you get planning approval? Because we have several commercial projects that have planning approval, but I don't think they've submitted building permits that would get potentially caught by this. So that's the first question is, ones with planning approval but haven't submitted a building permit, are they going, if we approve this, will we be able to collect funds from them?
So I will refer to the consultant here, but I believe that when we set up the program, we can specify those parameters. I'll turn to the consultant and see if she has any additional.
Yes, the fees are typically collected and levied at the time of building permit, when they secure a building permit. But when you have projects in the pipeline, and it is up to the city's discretion as to which projects, usually you set a date, and that some projects are grandfathered and exempt because they did, they went forward with their application without an understanding of what these fees were, that the fees will be in place. So often you can grandfather it, but it's at the city's discretion, the towns.
So I'd like to ask probably some questions of Mr. Paulson. So if we take some of our examples, let's take the Winchester office that we have a planning approval, but they're trying to sell it, so I doubt that they've submitted any building permits. So I think that falls under, they would have to pay this fee. Wild guess, what is the building valuation of that office building? Is it going to be $5 million, so we'd be able to collect $50,000?
It'll far exceed $5 million. It's a 30,000 square foot building, as I recall. And typically that valuation is set when they actually submit their building permits. I would also defer to the town attorney, but typically if you've received planning entitlements, to then add an additional fee that wasn't, as the consultant mentioned, anticipated at time of planning entitlements, I think we may run into some challenges, but the town attorney and I can look into that should the council decide to move forward with an ordinance, so that we can make sure that we are meeting the law as to whatever threshold or timetable we set for implementation of that.
And I think that's an important question, because I don't think we have planning permits for the Elks Lodge 4 houses. I don't think we have planning permit for this Winchester office building. I don't think we've got building permits submitted for all of the North 40. I suspect they've only submitted maybe phase 1, so you may have 2/3 of the North 40 that might still apply, and I'm guessing that's $100 million there on the North 40, which generates some, $1 million for this. So I think it's a big deal whether we understand which ways that's going. Go ahead and answer that, and then I'll add to it.
Sure. So North 40 specifically has submitted building permits for all of phase 1, with the exception of 3 standalone commercial buildings. So most of that has already been submitted, including the mixed-use affordable housing, parking garage, commercial component with the market hall. Elks Lodge has planning entitlements. They have not submitted for building permits. Some other ones that are out there, Alberto has submitted for building permits, so that's already in the pipeline as well. But the next phase or phases of the North 40 could be an opportunity to implement this type of fee that could basically lead to a fair amount of funds.
So what about we know that there's interest in a senior assisted living facility on Blossom Hill where Tego is now next to the highway. So they haven't even gone through planning yet. I'm assuming that's probably a large $50 million building?
So they actually have planning approval. Planning Commission approved that earlier this year. And so that one, I do not believe they have submitted building permits yet. But those, again, as I think Mr. Baker mentioned before, whether it's affordable housing, you may look at some other uses and decide whether or not you want to have, that type of use included in the exemptions or levy this fee.
Is that an affordable housing or assisted living or some of both?
No, it's assisted living.
So that's not
Some-
necessarily affordable housing.
It is not, but other jurisdictions, I think, have exempted senior. That doesn't mean we have to, or any of the other items listed by Mr. Baker.
Am I guessing right that it could be $50 million, so that could generate $500,000 for the Arts Commission if that got caught by the process?
Again, I don't.
I know you have
I
to
don't wanna
guess, but
venture a guess.
it's some number 30 to 50 or something that generates
It would be a significant.
hundreds of thousands of
It would
dollars.
be a significant amount of funds. That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, it would be perfectly appropriate for any motion that comes forward, should the council be interested in a fee to specify or at least provide direction in terms of what your expectations of a pipeline definition might be. So this is exactly the type of dialogue that we need in order to understand what you would want to see in an ordinance.
Well, and that might be difficult for tonight to do because you need to know that they can have entitlements. Some of these might be PDs that have locked-in fees, other ones might not. Some of them have vested maps. When the final map's been approved, plays into it. So there's a lot of different components. Certainly when we brought back the ordinance, that would be a big one to show where that date is. And I can tell you, I've wrestled with that on many different councils before. And when you talk about you're just grabbing 50,000 or 75,000 maybe from one or two developments, you might not get a challenge. But if you're grabbing it back to anything that's never been building permit level and you're now talking about a tremendous amount of money, you'll get those developers to come together to fight that. So that's the things you'll have to do. So we'll have to bring that analysis, show you all the ones are in the pipelines, which ones have vested interests, which ones do not, and then you could pick that date looking at what's the best way to do it without being susceptible to a challenge. There certainly is more that could be capitalized even with those in there that I don't believe have entitlements.
So I'm going to jump in here, and since we're on the subject a little bit, as Mr. Rennie commented, you can have a $1 million fee potentially on a project, excluding the time frame of when the building permits are pulled and the planning permits and all that stuff. Let's just say we're starting today and we have an ordinance in place. Wouldn't it be wise to put a cap, a dollar amount cap? It could be 1% up to the first $50,000, because it does not seem fair to collect $1 million from one development. I mean, what would they do with $1 million for arts from one project in Los Gatos? So have you seen caps?
Yes, on the final page of the report, there's a matrix that shows some of our neighboring cities. Some of those cities do have caps that they have imposed. Those cap limits could be, it would be at your discretion. I don't know if our consultant has any other things that she'd like to add regarding caps or thresholds.
Yes, they are common, caps are, and I think one city has a cap of $200,000. Others put caps on the square footage, and one thing I do want to remind everyone, it is good in these programs that this is an in lieu fee, and they have developers would also have the opportunity to build on site, especially when you have big projects, because I think that's a fundamental part of your ordinance being supported by existing case law, because you want to make sure that it's really not a taking and that they have an opportunity to provide on-site art.
Okay, thank you. So we had some questions. Councilmember Sayoc first, then Councilmember Spector.
So a question to the consultant. Of these neighboring cities that have enacted this, do you know when was the most recent?
I think some of them were in 2018. I can. I'll check.
I mean, 2018 sufficient.
Yeah.
So it's not. It's relatively
Oh, yes.
recent. So.
And cities are often amending these ordinances, and so they are happening today.
Okay.
It's not an old piece of legislation.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Baker, you mentioned staff costs as a component of this. Are we talking about staff working with the commission and having his or her regular salary, or are we talking about an added cost above and beyond that?
No, I don't work off the clock. Sorry.
The question is whether we need an outside consultant to go from this point forward. No, we can take it from now with your direction and work it from staff level through the Art Commission and then through council.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor?
Two questions. One from Mr. Schultz. Is it fair to say that this town council could not impose retroactive fees without being subject to liability?
No, you can set a date for when
But if
the
I have
projects.
planning entitlements
It
in a
depends on
building-
those, and that's where I'd have to create that list on which ones have entitlements and which ones vested and which ones are not. And we'd have to look at that and look at the exposure, as I said before.
Okay.
And chances are, yes, you might pick the date that the ordinance is after considering all the challenges that could occur. Just pick the date that the ordinance is enacted and move forward from then.
Thank you. The second question, I don't know if it's Ms. Pavetti or Mr. Baker. The town already has something of a public arts program, which we ran into with the Veterans Memorial. In reading the consultant's report, its question that came to mind was, well, is our current program sufficient, or do we need to do something new or different that is would be specifically connected with an ordinance if the council decides to move forward?
We do have a policy regarding pardon me, the acquisition of artwork and the way that those that we decide on a particular artwork that would be built somewhere. However, there's no funding that's attached to that. All the projects that have come forward, the Veterans Project not having come through the city necessarily for its funding, all the projects that have come forward through which the town has had a hand in terms of bringing those projects have been direct asks to the council. So they have done a direct ask for the Gateway Project, direct ask for other projects as they've come up.
Right, I understand that. My question is, the consultant says, in order to do this ordinance correctly or this program correctly, if you're going to generate fees, you have to have all of these various programs in place and processes in place. One of them being a public arts program with parameters of where you do it, how you do it, what you do with funds, in lieu fees, what's exempted, what's not. And so my question is, could the council, if it wanted to go forward with an ordinance, just take our current arts policy and say, great, incorporate it into an ordinance, or does it have to go through the task of preparing an entirely new public arts program in conjunction with a proposed ordinance and funding?
Looking at that particular policy, it could be a starting point, but I believe a lot of extra work would be necessary, especially as identified in the consultant's report with locations of things and how funds could be used and not.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rainey?
One more question I thought of. Some of these big projects where you think, oh, we might generate $200,000, $300,000, actually the on-site building could absorb all of that $200 and whatever artwork they put in that. So my question is, and I don't recall if it was in the report, is how do you decide what is artwork? So let's say they say, we're going to put this fancy facade on the building, we're going to call it artwork, and it's part of the money that you need. Or, we're doing some fancy topiary bushes and we're calling that artwork, and that's part of, so is there some guideline of what's artwork that they choose? You talked about a program where if we get the money, what are we going to do with it? The question is, how do we determine if what they've spent it on is really artwork?
Yes, and again, in the report, there was additional follow-up that needed to happen. Some of that follow-up was actually defining what art is. If our consultant can clarify me if I'm wrong on that one. But what that actually means for public art, I'm assuming that entails things of how public is it, how accessible is it, what things would be disqualified, what things would be qualified for those. And so those are decisions that would have to be made. The Arts and Culture Commission would research similar ordinances in other jurisdictions in terms of how they made those definitions, and then would compile something that they would present to the council at a later time that would define those things there. I don't know if there's anything else that the consultant would like to add on that respect.
That's correct, and they would have to get approval. So part of the process, you would outline a process. They would come forward with what their plans are, who the artist would be, what their qualifications are, and then there would be a process of going through and making sure that their proposed artwork complies with your requirements. And so like some programs were very specific, saying logos, for example, are not art. Landscaping is not art unless it's something very specific that is agreed to by the town, so.
And then in most jurisdictions, that would be a recommendation. Also, they'd have to go to the arts. If a project came forward and wanted to do it on site, we'd have to go to the Arts and Culture Commission, and then council, and would be in the ordinance on whether the deciding body would be Planning Commission, or the council could decide that would be a standalone, have to come if there's an arts project, part of the actual project would have to come to council. So that's stuff we'd flesh out in the ordinance if we move forward.
All right, seeing no more discussion from council, we will open up the public comments. I have one card, Michael Miller, and if anybody else wants to speak, please complete a card.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. Thank you for your time. My name is Michael Miller, and I've been serving on the Arts Commission for a little over 2 years now. And I really want to thank you for this consideration. I think we're greatly underfunded for a town like this, and public art serves the community in a great way. It also enhances the value for everybody here, both for our kids and, you know, for people to come through town. Memorable things, public art is a great thing. So I've had about 25 years in arts leadership on both coasts, and I've worked with municipalities in developing ways to create funding. And I know that the council stands by to help raise more money to enhance our community, to make it, you know, more interesting, more beautiful, to have public art, to have arts organizations that are thriving. Well, one of the things that we have now with our arts funding is a small amount of money that we give out to different organizations, mostly in the educational world. And that money is great, but it really is not money that moves the needle. It just is incremental help. You know, giving a grant of $3,000 doesn't really allow somebody to market themselves. I know now we're talking about public art, and really we're hopeful that we can do some things to enhance the community. So that's all I have to say. Any questions? I could be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for Mr. Miller? I see none. Well, thank you for your service on the Arts Commission. And that is the only card. Seeing no others, I will close the public hearing and move back to council for consideration, comments, motion. Councilmember Sayoc.
I have more questions. So if I understand the process, the question before us tonight is, do we want to move in this direction? And all the questions that were asked tonight would be discussed further by Mr. Baker and the Arts Commission, and an ordinance and or a program would then come back to us for consideration that would hopefully answer these various questions.
That's correct. The actual ordinance is going to contain many definitions, which have not yet been decided upon. It will contain a lot of discussion, a lot of decision-making. At this particular point, we just need to know if the council is in favor of moving forward with an ordinance, and we begin that process. The ordinance itself with those definitions and those parameters would come back at a later time if the council moves in that direction.
And my second question, if I may, at that time, we should also anticipate a list of what the foreseeable projects are, so that we could then have a value of what the cost would be to move forward versus the revenue we anticipate. Is that correct?
That can be prepared as well, yes.
Okay.
And also where you'd see this, since we're already in September, you'd probably see this at the very top of the list, if, you know, and give a report on where we are in my ordinance that comes forward, and priorities or goals in January, because this won't get done by January, and we might have a draft done, but that's, you're going to see that if you do move forward, that's going to be one of the top ones to show that you've already given us direction to work on this ordinance.
And then my third question, just to confirm that current, Mr. Baker's current workload, as well as the Arts Commission, this can currently be absorbed within your work plan for the year, and that we don't anticipate, the additional cost that we anticipate is staff time to put together this ordinance and answer the various questions we've asked. Is that correct?
At this time, that is correct.
Okay.
Councilmember Rennie.
So is the recommendation for new construction only, or do major remodels get caught in this? So I realize that we're exempting single-family and two-unit project. Let's say somebody comes forward with a major remodel of a multi-unit facility. Does that count?
Yes, so any new project, which would be the additional square footage, which would be added, remodel project where additional square footage is added to that remodel project, would be captured in that. And I believe there are some small caveats that the consultant can address regarding a remodel that does not include new square footage. I believe it's just on the new square footage.
Well, there's no restriction on that. And that's at the town's discretion. Because it's not like other impact fees. It's not an impact fee. So there isn't any restriction on it that it be tied to square footage. That's to your discretion.
And so I'm really asking for a recommendation. When I look at this, I agree with, let's do 1%. Let's exempt single family. Let's exempt two-unit projects. Let's exempt accessory dwelling units. Let's exempt affordable housing projects. I agree with all of that, but the question in my mind becomes, is it only, or, where do we go with the new development? Or is it just new development? Or if somebody's got a 5-unit, I don't know what the size of the facilities are, let's say on Masol, there's down near Bean, there's a unit there that probably has 15 units. So it's clearly multifamily. If they decide to add 2 units somehow, are they now subject to this because they're already multifamily? But it applies to, obviously, the building permit amount.
So that would be up to council's discretion when we brought the ordinance back. And maybe we bring it back as a draft instead of an introduction if there's that many issues that need to be decided. But that's something, at least in my research, I would look at all the other jurisdictions and exactly how they treated each individually one, and if it's across the board, we can bring that issue back to you to look how other jurisdictions have decided whether a remodel is considered, how much is being remodeled, whether it's additional square footage, and all those issues. There's still something that is not decided as of right now. Again, this was just to see if there's interest in us moving forward, and then we can delve into those issues and flesh them out first at the Arts and Culture and see what their response is, and then to council.
So I'll restate that I am interested in moving forward at the 1% level with the exemptions stated in the staff report.
All right. No one else speaking. I guess I'll speak. I support this concept. I think it's something that we should pursue. As far as the percentages, I was going to recommend 2%, and I was looking at the matrix that is in the binder, and there's a lot of other things to consider, such as caps on amounts. I was looking at Cupertino, and they say they cap it at 1% on the first 1 million, and then after the first 1 million, they go to, I think it's 0.9%. But what I'm getting at is, I think we should leave those kinds of discussions of what's the best practices up to the committee. I think the recommendation in the report is to direct the preparation of an ordinance. It says designating 1%, but I think I would go with 2%, and I would make that a motion. Do I have a second? Someone else make a motion. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and learn from your mistakes. I'm going to move that we receive the Private Sector Arts Contribution Program report and direct the preparation of an ordinance and ask and look to the preparers of the ordinance to recommend the percentage of building valuation cost of new development for funding public arts.
Second. Discussion. Vice Mayor.
I'm going to be opposing the motion. I think public art is a good thing. I think that this council has supported public art in a number of respects. I don't think this is the way to go. Staff costs are a cost. Administrative costs are a cost. processing costs are a cost. And this, as we've learned from the consultant, can potentially only generate $3,500 a year, which is less than it costs to administer. Given that, and given the other priorities that the town has, we discussed $83 million in pension deficits earlier this evening, infrastructure problems or traffic problems. I don't see us investing those monies, given that we've been told that this is not enough to generate actually any art without additional funding, that I don't think that this is a good expenditure of staff and town monies, given the administrative and processing costs that it is going to entail for the very small return. In addition, given the various exemptions that are suggested, there are a whole heck of a lot of things in the pipeline that wouldn't even apply to this. In addition, just going forward, assuming that this motion is going to pass, a 2-unit definition of multifamily development, I think, is unwise. If the general plan goes forward and allows single-family residences to divide into more than 2 units, that single-family resident is going to be paying for art. The idea that alterations or additions to commercial buildings is included, I think, is a detraction to our downtown businesses who are trying to get through with improvements and additions at less cost that this council is trying to support, and by imposing another cost on them, we are not helping our downtown. If we do multifamily housing, to me, if this is going to go forward, that multifamily developments or commercial has to be in a mixed-use context, in a transit-oriented context, where it makes sense, not in residential areas. There has to be a cap. And should projects under 2,000 square feet be exempted? Yes. So essentially, my problem with it is, while I would like to do something for the arts, and the town has always done something for the arts, I don't think this is the best and most cost-effective approach, given the other priorities that we have. And if the Arts Commission is looking for underfunding, or they have a project in mind, or they want to work with a developer to fund art in a project, great. To the extent the town can partner in that, great. But by putting this on the books with the ongoing administrative costs and processing costs, I just don't see that it's an advantage, so I won't be supporting the motion.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. So I disagree, as I asked a bunch of questions, that I disagree that it's not going to generate much money. I think it can generate a lot of money. And I would ask the maker of the motion, maybe it's appropriate to include or not, or maybe it's not appropriate to include. Earlier, staff had suggested doing an analysis of when this becomes effective and where in the pipeline we apply this. I don't know if they'll do this anyway, or whether the maker of the motion would like to include that in the motion, because I think that's an interesting piece of it. Also, following up a little bit on what Councilmember Jensen is saying, I would also, you don't need to put it in the motion, but I'll just give my thought that if a commercial is doing a remodel, it shouldn't be caught by this. If they're bulldozing a building and building a new one, yes. If they're adding square footage, most of the time we're talking about adding square footage. So I'm assuming her comments are not correct the way this is proposed, that it would catch the remodeling of downtown businesses as they, take down a wall and make it larger, or they divide it, or they do different things like that. I assume that would not get caught in this. Maybe that's a question for staff also, and I asked a question of the maker of the motion too.
Councilmember Spector, would you like to respond to Mr. Rennie's friendly amendment or question? Or
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know I don't have to, but with regard to all of the issues raised, dividing a single-family home, analysis of when effective, downtown remodels, cap, square footage, I am assuming that those issues will be addressed in any draft ordinance that comes back to us. Well, I'll just leave it go at then, and so therefore I will not be amending my motion.
And as the seconder of the motion, that's what I also anticipated, that we are just voting this evening for the concept of a 1% fee to be brought forward, and then there's a lot of details that need to be sorted out, and looking at the matrices and best practices from other communities and all those kinds of things. I will also add that there were estimations or evaluations versus staff time mentioned, but I think it's really hard for us to really debate any kind of figures on this at this point in time. As Mr. Rennie said, he thinks it could possibly generate much more money than the staff time required. I anticipate that probably being the case as well in the long run. But I also anticipate the value of the art in the community to be priceless. We do have some great works of art around town. We have fantastic architecture, fantastic weather, fantastic setting. We have everything, but I think we could use a little more art. And that's why I am supporting the motion as the seconder of the motion. Any further discussion or comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
Passes 4-1. Moving on to item number 9, which is provide direction regarding the town priorities for its annual community grants program. Mr. Baker again.
There we go. Yes, so we are taking a look at our community grants program. Community grants program has been running for about 25 years here in town. It's an unusual program for jurisdictions of our size. You don't see it in any of our neighbors in quite the same way that we have it. Over the course of 25 years, a lot of things have changed in the way that we approach this program. It's handled through the Community and Senior Services Commission and the Arts and Culture Commission in terms of the recommendations that they bring to the council from the grant applicants. And again, over the course of 25 years, this program has been handed from what used to be the Community Services Department to the Town Manager's Department. Staff has changed, our commissions have changed, and certain traditions and ways of going about the process have changed and become entrenched. And so it's a good time every once in a while to recalibrate the program and make sure that it aligns with the priorities that the council has set. So we're bringing some questions for you tonight to help realign this program to council priorities. The goal of this whole process is to have staff have a single grant process that is transparent and fair to all the applicants or organizations that seek grant funding. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask, I have 6 questions in which have become sort of sticking points or issues between the different commissions and the applicants at various times, or have become a question mark for staff. Based on those questions, the direction you give, I will come back with, we'll use those to create a model which will be the way that the grant program will look going forward. And at that point, you can accept that if you choose so. So as I go through these questions in particular, note that I do not need a motion from you tonight. I just need a general direction and clarification on some of your thoughts so that I can craft what this program should look like in terms of your priorities so that it can be brought back at a future time for approval. And with that, you will find in your staff report that for each one of the questions, the Community and Senior Services Commission and the Arts and Culture Commission did have their input, and their input is contained in your staff report for each of these questions. So the first question that I have for you tonight is, should the priority for community grants be for one-time allocations for new projects or services, or should it be for the ongoing operational costs or some combination thereof? And with that, it's important to note that in our original guidelines that we have for the grants, of the 4 different categories, 3 of those categories specify one-time allocations, one-time projects, get a project going. But the majority of our grant giving revolves around ongoing grants, and at this point, it's moved more from particular projects to operational funding for those to keep those projects going in the long term. Either way is perfectly acceptable or perfectly fine way to do it. We just need some clarification in terms of the priority of the council. Is it for new projects, or is it to keep ongoing projects going? I can read through the questions, or I could stop after each question for your discussion, however you would like to take this. Oh, pardon me. If, you know what, if that's, I was, noticed that there's a public comment, so maybe I should go through all 6 questions, open, or however, yeah.
Mr. Baker, if you can just briefly go through all 6 as you just did with the first one, the remaining 5, and then I have an idea how I will organize the discussion after we hear the public comments.
Sure, excellent. The next question has to do with the categories that we currently have. Currently, we have human services, arts, and education as 3 separate categories. If these coincide with the priorities of council, that's fantastic, but something to consider would be, are other categories useful or beneficial or would align with council priorities? Such examples might be a grant for environmental programs or new environmental projects, community events around town, or community vitality could be possibilities. Let's see, the next question. Should organizations be allowed to apply for more than 1 grant in a single year? Currently, we have several of our applicants, 4 applicants that apply for more than one grant in a single year, and are typically awarded more than 1 grant in a single year. Which is perfectly fine if you wish to move in that direction. This is just clarifying whether or not that should be allowed, or if that should be reconsidered. The next question would be, should it be the practice to distribute smaller amounts than requested by the applicants in order to give as many grants as possible, or to give as broadly as possible? This is the current practice of the commissions to receive the grant applications, and even though there's certain amounts that the organizations are asking for, they look at the total amount that's available, and they divvy up that total amount to spread it to spread it across more organizations, even though the organizations will not receive what they've requested. To paraphrase this one, it's should we have fewer larger grants, or should we have many smaller grants? If I come back on a particular model with this one, this will probably be more clarified as we have X quantity of grants at X amount, be it more big ones or many smaller ones. The next question would be, is it necessary for applicants to present verbally in addition to their written applications? And to what extent should the presentation influence the final awards designations or recommendations? The current practice is to have these grant applications be heard at a public hearing at both the Community Services Commission and the Arts and Culture Commission, in which the applicants come forward and they all have a time to speak within the public hearing. This is a remnant, a holdover from when this application project, when these grants had community block development grant funds, CDBG funds. It is no longer necessary that we follow that particular guideline. It's just a remnant. Some arguments here would be that just the strength of the application alone, is that worthwhile in what your considerations are? This has been kind of a sticking point for a lot of our grant applicants, and anecdotally, our grant applicants are not the happiest with this particular step in the process. However, our commissions, particularly the Community and Senior Services Commission, really like seeing the face-to-face. We just love to clarify if this should be part of the process or not. Again, either way is fine. And then the final one regards funding, and it's what funding amount should be prioritized for community grants. And for this in particular, we, at the moment, wait for the recommendation to come from the commissions. The recommendation is brought before council. Council puts the final dollar amount by adding or subtracting those amounts. Some other organizations may circumvent the grant process and ask for amounts during the year, which are very grant-like, and then the council may give those as well. All those amounts are then entered into the budget kind of at the last minute, or they're amended in the budget. And from a staff point of view, we would love to just be able to say every year there is X amount in the budget in this line item for grants, and we don't have to go through all the amending and changing right at the last minute. I think it would help out considerably if we just had a set amount every year. And with that, I've got those 6 questions, and I will turn it over to council.
Questions for Mr. Baker? Seeing none at this time, does anybody from our audience wish to speak on this matter? Ms. Summers, if anybody else wishes to speak, please bring forth a card.
Good evening, council. My name is Catherine Summers. I'm the Executive Director of the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce. And I'm here to actually applaud Ryan for kind of stepping up and taking this, taking on the task of really simplifying this community grant program. I get a lot of calls from organizations who are wanting to apply, and they really get a little, just a little bit confused as to who can apply, how much should they ask for, and what have you. So I did have a couple comments on it. The one going to the question of, is more to a few better than less to many? And I think my response to that would be more to a few is better. I think it's up to the council to really set your priorities and make a difference with those organizations that that you believe in are those that will benefit the town most. I know that was really hard at one of the last meetings when there's so many people getting up, and every organization seems to have its reason to fund them, but I just think that you can't do that, because when you do give less, then it spreads it out too much, and then I don't think we see the exact benefits that we would otherwise. I did want to point out as well, just in the staff report, because I didn't want you to get confused, that on page 6, it says in the last fiscal year, this included 2 allocations for the Chamber of Commerce in the amounts of $22,000 and $15,000. I do understand that the council is very generous with the Chamber of Commerce, but I did want to point out that that $22,000 was not, in fact, to the Chamber of Commerce. That was to the PBID steering committee. The Chamber of Commerce is solely the facilitator for that and trying to bring that to fruition. The $15,000, it was for the Visitor Information Center, and that was just a request to up the funding there so that we could staff it better and have, that the center would be more effective, which is actually is proving to be. So those were my comments.
We have a question from the Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Summers. I'm just curious about your comment on more to a few. And as you are fully aware, when an organization doesn't receive a grant, they often come back later and ask for that money. So if you are advocating the more to a few, would you also advocate one shot at getting that funding?
Yes, I would. And I think if you put that requirement in early, that then you would come and ask for the full ask, and you'd really, you would require then that organizations do their year-long schedule of events and needs and what have you. So I think that's a fair.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Summers. That was the only speaker. I will close the public hearing, and we'll move on to providing staff direction on this item. This is, as I understand it, we're just giving direction based on the 6 questions, and we won't be making any motions, but you'll be taking a tally of our answers to your questions. And that's kind of the way I wanted to frame it for council to run through. So I was going to suggest beginning on my right with Councilmember Sayoc and going down the line and us answering the 6 questions in order. Does everybody think that is a good idea?
Sure.
Okay, good.
May I start
Councilmember
with just
Sayoc.
questions first?
Yes, so the first page of the 3, and then if you have to move to the second page of the 3 with each person.
So the first question, before we even get to these questions, on page 3, current grant program categories, art, education, human services. Can you clarify education? I was always under the impression it was education for the arts, but is it a standalone education category?
That is a fantastic question that has been the object of much discussion. And so good clarification in this would also be appreciated.
Okay.
It looks like at various times in the past 25 years, specifically past 10 years, there have been times when education was defined as and grants were given for something that were very educational, non-arts related. And then that has flipped at other times. Where it has been arts education, and both of those in conjunction had to kind of be working together. So that is an unclear area. We do have educational organizations that do apply specifically for educational things that are not related to the arts. So a clarification in that would be also fantastic.
Okay. And my second process question, if you can remind me, where in the calendar year do we have a better idea of how much we can actually provide? When in the calendar year do we know our budget so we can actually tell our commissions how much money we can give out?
We do our CAFR in the second meeting in December, and then we know if we have any year-end surplus from the prior fiscal year. So that would be, that's when we have a really good data point. We typically have run this program assuming status quo of about 120,000 total. And I think that's the kind of certainty that we would like to have.
Okay, and that's helpful for me. Okay, so I'll go through all of these. The first question, should they be one-time allocations or some combination? I would be very curious to know which grantees have been receiving on almost a regular basis for operational. Because in the staff report, we do mention that there are several, and I think we need to actually look at whether those are operationals that are partners, so that in reality, are those really grants or are those partnerships that we might have to fold into the budget? So I think that's a very valid point, and personally, I'd like to see that, because that takes on a different, once you're funding an operational program, that's a whole, in my mind, different from a community grant. So I'd like to see that distinguished. I look at community grants as funding a project or a specific program with an outcome. And if it's operational, we're no longer doing that. Of the three categories reflecting priorities, what I would love is to move our governance processes so that as we define our priorities in the beginning of the year, we also know how much we are willing to allocate to fund those priorities. So it gives us an idea of, yes, this is important to us, these are our priorities, and this is how much we as a council will fund towards that, whether it's community service, arts, community vitality, etc. And so I'd love us to move in that direction, and that it be a one-time amount that, as Councilmember Johnson said, that's your one shot. So, number 3, should they be allowed to apply for more than one? I think personally, I'd like to see one applicant per, but I think, again, it varies on the various priorities that we outline. So once we clarify and really fine-tune what those are, I think that would help identify whether or not it's a legitimate ask. If you could just switch to the 4, 5, and 6. On number 4, and I speak to this as someone that's written many grants as a nonprofit, I think if a commission cannot fund the full amount that's being requested, I don't think you should fund it. Because oftentimes a nonprofit will provide to you, this is what we can do with this amount, and it's actually been a hardship on our part to get less than that, but have to actually deliver the same services that we promised to do. So I think either you're funding it, you believe in that outcome that they've specified, and that amount that's necessary to achieve that, or you're not funding it at all. And it's a tough decision, but I think you want to maximize the dollar amounts and that impact. And so to dilute that amount, I think is not something we would want to see. Number 5, I don't think applicants should be required to come. I think it provides a hardship to the smaller nonprofits that can't afford more staff time. And number 6, the prioritization, I think that should be, I would love to see every commission prioritize their funding to reflect the council and the staff's and all commissions' priorities for the upcoming 2 years so that we're better aligned.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Preliminary question of staff. Wouldn't the amount that we have available, or couldn't the amount that we have available be determined by our budget in May, or whatever month it is?
That would be way too late, because we typically go through the application process in the February-March timeframe, and with all of the hearings and meetings, et cetera, it takes us, several months for our commissions to make the recommendation. So it really is much better if we have a dollar amount up front, and then the commissions, if we still use a commission process, would be able to make their selections in a more timely way. May is way too late.
And why couldn't the selections, and putting aside what the process is going to be, because it may very well change, but why couldn't the decisions be made after May? I mean, you're saying that under the reality, current reality, it has to happen, because we do all this work in January, February, March, whatever. But that may not be the new reality.
That's absolutely true. So the other approach is, especially if we have a tough budget year, council may say, okay, only through the budget process will we know what amount we have left. We then budget that amount. Maybe it's $100,000 or whatever the amount is, and then we run the grant selection process in July. I think what would be difficult is that many of our organizations run on a fiscal year, July 1 fiscal year, so it would be a little bit odd to be getting funding while the fiscal year had already started. But if that's the will of the council, we could work with that.
Okay, well, I don't know what the will of the council will be, but I am going to assume, I'm going to be very general in my answers, and I'm also going to assume that the amount of money available has been budgeted and determined. Okay, number one. Again, going along with the general, I believe that whatever organization comes in can request monies for whatever they determine is important to them, and that's what we consider, not if it's operational or combination or projects. So they just come in and ask, we want X amount of money for Y things. With regard to number two, I do not think that we need to identify or limit the subject requests for the to Human Services Arts Education. The applicant would come in and say, we are requesting funding for, again, fill in the blank. It could be environmental, whatever. So it's not limited to those three. I would not have applicants, organizations be able to apply for more than one grant per year. You come in, you do it, it's done. I don't have the same life experience as Ms. Sayak, and so I would say that the applicant can come in and ask for whatever amount of money it wants or it's requesting, and then the council ultimately determines how much it grants. I really like when applicants present verbally or come and present at a hearing. I learn a lot more, even a lot more than I have in the writing. So I like a verbal presentation to the council. Whether or not it's mandatory, I'm flexible on that. And the amount of money that should be prioritized for community grants is the amount that this council determines in its budget process.
Thank you, Councilmember Spector. So are we on page 1 again? There we go. I will go down the list. My answers are shorter. I would say both. To 2, I would say maybe, based on what I heard from Councilmember Spector. And I would go by the guidelines that we have established that are already written in our staff report, the last 2 pages that are used to evaluate the grading criteria for the grants. Number 3, I would say no. We go to number 4, and these are all, that would be, let's see, should it be our practice? I would say no, and I'll get to that in a minute. I would say 5 would be no, they should not be required to come and submit verbally if they've submitted the paperwork. Number 6, what funding amount should be prioritized for community grants? Here's why my answers are so simple. Historically speaking, I think we're looking around about $120,000 per year that we've been giving out. So I thought, why don't we take this $120,000 and put $20,000 towards the arts and put $100,000 towards the human services. And then I thought we can take $4,000 per arts grant would be the maximum if they applied. So you'd have the first 5 applicants that met all the criteria that they applied, that we have drafted already. The first 5 who apply that meet all of the criteria get the $4,000, and then after that, no mas. And then for the community service, the first 20 get $5,000 each. So mathematically, $120,000 a year works. 5 grants for the arts, 20 grants for the human services. Now, these numbers are not set in stone, but if we do a number like $120,000 and we do a maximum that can be applied for, we will not be getting people bum rushing us at budget time saying, hey, I want $50,000 for this, or I want this and this. It sets an expectation. It also, I think, addresses Councilmember Sayak's question where should you give less than what they applied for? Otherwise, it potentially is worse for them to even make the application. If you tell them you apply for $5,000, and if you meet the criteria, you get the $5,000, that's great. The expectations are set up front. And it takes out a lot of the efforts and the pain and the, I don't know, objectivity, subjectivity, whatever the correct adjective is, that the arts commissioners and the community service commissioners have to go through to evaluate all these grants. Because there's a lot of great needs out there, and there's a lot of, how can I say it? A lot of emotion that comes with that, and the application. We wish you had unlimited amounts of money to give, but we don't. But if we say, the most you can get is this, and you got to be by this deadline, and the first come first serve, then I think it establishes a fair set of rules for everybody. That takes a lot of pressure off of staff in the boards and the commission and the council. So that's why I came up with those numbers. Councilmember or Vice Mayor Jensen.
Okay, thank you. Question 1, I agree with Commissioner Sayak. Councilwoman Sayak. There are lots of programs that we traditionally fund for operational costs. They come to depend on that. The town knows it's going to give those awards basically. Those ought to be part of the budget, not part of a grant process, so that we make room for other ideas and other programs. Number 2. I like the categories. I think education should not be connected with art. So, for example, if you want to come and do a coding program or you want to do a whatever, that's fine. Or if you want to do a reading program, imagine that. That would be good. So, no, I don't. I like the categories, though. I don't, because I worry about some applications that we've received, which are basically for, please give me money for my event for my group, which I don't think should rise to the level of a grant. So I think it ought to be for identified priority item. Let's see. Should they be allowed to have more than one in a year? No. And so then I think it's really important that whatever comes back has a schedule, a guideline, an application date, a cutoff date, and big bold letters that say, this is it, you can't come back. I was convinced by the staff report that bigger awards in the amount requested is better than multiple small awards. Because also by my experience, multiple small awards means somebody comes back later and asks for the rest of it. Should they have to come to make a verbal presentation to the town council? Yes. To the commissions? No. What amount should be prioritized? The council should determine a dollar amount in its budgeting practice and say, this is our dollar amount. I don't think it ought to be broken down by category. I think whatever's the best program ought to be able to compete, but we should have a set figure that is set for the year so everybody knows that once that's awarded, there's no more money.
Councilmember Rennie?
So I'll start off by saying I'm not sure this was the best process because I feel like I have things to say. It would be interesting to get discussion going, not, we haven't had any discussion on this. Everybody's just giving their sort of pre-decided opinion versus getting to listen to other people. I guess I have the most advantage because I got to listen to everybody first. My perspective is, I think, influenced by sitting on many years on the Housing and Community Development Advisory Committee in the county, where we gave out funds to a lot of human services, different kinds of organizations, and also being involved in nonprofits in the town that are also coming and asking for grants. I sort of feel like there's a difference. We have certainly at our Community Services Senior and Community Services Commission, they have a lot of requests for grants that are ongoing programs that keep these programs going. There are things like the Live Oak Nutrition Program, the Live Oak Adult Program, West Valley Community Services, Next Door Solutions, the Silicon Valley Law Foundation. These are all human services organizations that have ongoing, they depend on ongoing grants from the county, from Los Gatos, from other cities. And I feel like a lot of these comments were inconsistent with their needs. This idea that, so for example, I would disagree with one of the comments Councilmember Sag said, if you can't give them all the money that they ask for, don't give them any. Well, many of these organizations, and instead I'd say you need to look at the history. This is always the way I vote on the HCDAC. Also, you got to look at the history of what we've been giving them, and they frequently ask for more money. We want to add a program or something like that. So they tend to ask for more than we've been giving them. So if we say, well, we don't want to give you the extra 20% you're asking for, we're not going to give you any, you've now just done more damage to these organizations that kind of depend on this ongoing need. So I'd be careful when somebody comes with sort of a first-time project and you say, now we can't give you all that money, we're not going to give you any. I tend to agree more with that. So the first bullet talks about separating new projects versus these ongoing operational. And, this is my point, that I think we should think about some budget for the operational, and certainly on the Senior and Community Services Commission, we tend to dole out most of the money to all the ongoing projects because we want to keep them going. So as a result, I would say let's create a separate budget for ongoing and then some amount for new projects so that new projects do get a chance to be tried. And then we can apply some of these thought processes to, a one-time project or a new project, or maybe even it's a startup of some hopefully ongoing idea. But I feel like they need to be separated for these reasons that I'm saying. And, some of these comments, I feel like they don't apply to the ongoing, but they apply, and so separating might help us apply those comments better. So the second one, separating the categories. So I like the idea of maybe adding the category suggested in here of community. Oh, let me go back. You also had suggested in the report that some of the ongoing ones might not need to apply every year. If you recall, that was an item in the report. And I do like that idea because it does cut down on everybody's efforts. And in the county at HCDAC, we've actually gone to that model. Instead of making people apply every year, now they apply every 2 years to cut down on their effort and the county's staff's effort and so forth. So more money goes to the application of whatever the service is versus, the administration of it. So I do like that idea of, maybe we just set some of these as ongoing contributions, but my comment I made in here is, well, then we need to have a review process every 2 or 3 years to make, so again, I like that idea, and if we decide to go that way, we would need some kind of review process of, should we continue to fund this? Is this organization, starting to not provide the same value they did, or is it, no longer in our values or something to that? But I do like that idea. So then going to the second question, sorry, Mr. Mayor, this is getting long, but I needed to preference this. Going to the second question, I like the idea of adding another category. I would call it slash it together, the community, what do you call it, community vitality and events. Because we've had a lot of confusion about that, and I think Councilmember Jensen also said make education a separate category. That seems to make sense to reduce the confusion at the commissions. Number 3, I guess at first I would have said, there's organizations that do apply more than once and have different types of programs they're working on, so they apply for different things in especially the nonprofits or potentially even the chamber applying for different things. I could see if you said, well, you can only apply once, I could see the chamber saying, well, okay, I've got this project, it's called Community Vitality, and I'm going to do an event in April, and I'm going to do an event in October, and I'm going to do an event in December, and they throw them all together in one application versus multiple applications. If we have to go to the one application, I guess that might solve it, but I tend to say allowing multiple applications for different kinds of projects. I know Councilmember Jensen doesn't like the idea that you didn't get money, so you come back for the same idea again. I agree with that. We don't really want that, but applications for completely different things seem acceptable to me. And so if you could advance to the next slide with the second set of questions. Again, this goes back to if we separate ongoing versus new or sort of major projects kind of thing, I think we need to have a focus on supporting the ongoing projects at some level close to what we've always been doing, so that those organizations know they have a reliable source of funding. Then with new projects or things that are, I guess, new, it does make more sense to go for fewer big contributions. I would not go and say we're going to only do a few big contributions and all of a sudden give some organizations much more than they even asked for and not give some to some of the other on our ongoing human services list, for example. I think that would be destructive. So we have to be careful how we apply that. I also like the idea of having them present verbally, although, again, if we go to this idea of some of the ongoing only have to come every 2 or 3 years, if we sort of renew them at that rate, then they don't need. What I wrote in my note is presenting verbally, I think, is important if there's going to be, if there's for some reason there's going to be a recommendation to completely kill it, or double the amount, or if it's a completely new idea that's not understood, the application itself may not give all of that, give enough information. And if I making this decision, yes, we're going to cut this program, I want to be able to hear from them about why we wouldn't cut the program, or I really want to understand, you want 50% more, what exactly is it you're giving? I like to have those the people present for those kinds of things. And I also appreciate the face of the people too. I like to see the lady from West Valley Community Services, so I have a face to where these are going. So to me, I like the presentations, certainly when they come to council and try to reinforce the recommendation from the different commissions that provide these. And I think Director Baker said that the commissions like it also, so I'm in support of that. And the last questions, I think we were just talking about, the answer is we do a budget at the beginning of the year. We try to figure out what our budget should be for the different categories. And I think that you need some amount of fungibility. If we go, say last year we had all these ongoing grants, that's the amount for this year, and we leave no room for some new idea that comes up, I think is not good. So I'm hoping at budget time that we budget with, what we know to support our ongoing, and maybe we decide one of them's not ongoing anymore, but that we also budget for the new idea that we haven't heard yet. So those are, I think, covering all those.
Thank you. Staff, do we have everything we need from council on this?
That works for me. I will take these and I will prepare what will be a model that I'll bring back to you that will incorporate these ideas, and at that time you could approve that model or disapprove of it as you see fit. But this is absolutely enough, and it answers, clarifies quite a few things. And I think many of the areas where it sounded like actually there was some disagreement, there is perfect workarounds that we can incorporate different things. So, all right, fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Baker. Council matters. Councilmember Sayoc.
Actually, I totally forgot to prepare my list. I don't believe since our last council meeting, there have been any regional meetings other than Silicon Valley Clean Energy that I attended.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since our last council meeting, the Policy Committee met and discussed several issues, including revised appeals ordinance and a lot of issues relating to below market price units.
Since our last regularly scheduled meeting, I attended the West Valley Mayors and Managers meeting along with the town manager, and in the town manager's memo from last Friday, there were some points made about the affordable housing that we discussed at the meeting. Vice Mayor.
I also attended the Policy Committee.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. Since the last council meeting, I attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Finance Committee, which was today. I attended the Emergency Operating Area Council, Committee Council, which I'm the vice chair. Also, the VTA Capital Programs Committee met, and one of the significant items there was the committee, I think, unanimously voted to put the Vasona Light Rail project on hold, and I think the wording was something like until further need, and that includes improvements to what's currently in place, including the double tracking that's on hold, all those improvements that they decided to put it on hold, and any potential expansion is on hold. So we translate that to, if more density is approved around the Campbell and the Los Gatos stations, then it may be needed to bring the project back. What it really means is there's not enough density to make it economically feasible to really run that line down further, or even spend money on the capital improvements, I guess, on the existing one. One other thing I did is I attended the county supervisors meeting where they did a memorial for one of our Los Gatos residents, Tim Lundell's wife. Tim was on our North 40 Advisory Committee. His wife passed away from cancer recently. Penelope O'Neill, I think is her last name. And Supervisor Wasserman read her obituary or eulogy at that meeting. So that was a very nice tribute to all the things she accomplished. That's it.
Manager matters. Ms.
Thank you.
Peretti.
Thank you. Just a reminder that Leadership Los Gatos applications are due on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you. And before we adjourn this evening, I would like to mention that one of our previous town employees, her name was Judge Mary Jo Levenger. She served as our town attorney from 1993 to the year 2000. She had also passed away. So I don't know if any of us up here had an opportunity to work with her, but I would like to adjourn the meeting in her memory and wish the best from the town to her family at this time. Seeing no other comments, thank you everybody for coming. This meeting is adjourned.